Good morning. This is Glenn Greenidge and Tom Pope, and we're having a conversation today about what responsibilities do businesses bear to their community. Tom, you want to start off?
This past weekend, we have seen a local dispute by protesters in Bushwick because of the upcoming loss of an associated supermarket. The supermarket has been virtually existing on a month by month lease from the property owner. The property owner doesn't want to renew this. The supermarket is going to go shut and employees will be lost. But more important, maybe, is the idea that this is the only supermarket in this community. So people will have to really struggle to get basic items. What's the responsibility of the corporation, of Associated, or any business to the local community?
Well,
Glenn?
you know, that brings up an interesting conversation proposition when you think of it, because you've got to have the accountability and responsibility of both the property owner and the business as well. Now, in this particular case, you're talking about creating a food desert in that particular community, and you're now in a already stressful time. You're asking the community to be more stressed out because they now have to travel. If you don't have a car, if you don't, now you got to get on public transportation or or something else to be able to get your groceries home. And for the people who live in that community who are walkers, who are elderly, who may not have transportation, you're now asking for additional monies, even if you already have a car. That means you now have to drive out of your community to pick up the essentials that you need. Now, fundamentally, you've got an issue where you're now taking dollars out of the community so that the local people are spending the money in another community. And that always is, that's never a good thing for any community when the dollars that are earned inside that community are leaving that particular community. I've got another situation that is similar to that. Underground parking lot, parking garage. Um, Evidently wasn't making a whole lot of money because of the pandemic.
This is
And
located where?
this is located in Jamaica, Queens, and the person the owning that parking lot decided that they wanted to change the locks. So they came in on a weekend, changed all the locks, and locked out the few people who were still coming, that were monthlies or what have you, um, to fend for themselves and have to park somewhere else. So um, we're seeing these kinds
What
of.
happened to the cars inside?
I don't believe that there are any cars. From what I understand, I don't know the full ramifications of the situation, but I understand that that there were quite a few cars that came in on a daily basis, and then of course they had monthlies. So the people who continued in the pandemic were a few of the monthlies. Not, I don't think all of the monthlies still came on because the courthouses and the office buildings surrounding that parking lot have been closed. So that's a main part of their revenue. So I guess the business owner felt like they weren't making enough money, so they just closed down, changed the locks and closed down the facility, and without any notice to the people who were still using it.
Now, are we approaching an ethical type of a question? If a business is maybe the only business in that community, does the business have a responsibility to service people in that area? Is the business, we keep hearing about the idea that the business is there to make money. Well, what about serving the population? Now, if we create a food desert, doesn't that business have the responsibility to say we have to work with the community? If we're taking a bit of a loss, we have to help the community, even though we're having a bit of a loss. And maybe it's also the responsibility of a locality like the borough president or maybe the mayor even to reimburse that business so it can remain. Um, aren't we talking about almost like a landmark preservation type of an issue where something is really desperately needed by the community?
Well, the yes, there is some responsibility for the business, because after all, the business is the making money off of the community that it is, quote unquote, serving. Now, you also have the because of the pandemic, businesses have not been able to adapt or to change their um, business model or their profit model that they've been utilizing, and so that comes into play as well. So what do you say to the parking lot owner who is usually used to having 40 or 50 cars in his parking lot um, daily, and he's down to three or four? Do you keep that business open when there are parking lots in the area that can still provide parking? Now, again, the supermarket's a little different because you're now talking about an essential piece. Parking is not essential in my it's a luxury, but something like a supermarket is essential to that particular community. Um, However, it sounds like from the case that you're pointing to, is that the property owner increased the lease, either increased the lease or decided that they didn't want to renew the lease of the grocery store. So in the case of the grocery store doesn't have a whole lot of rights when it comes to that, you know, and that's a problem for businesses. I've known quite a few businesses over the years that if the landlord um, wanted a new tenant, um, or had a friend or a family member that wanted to use that particular space, via an apartment or a commercial space, they would make it unreasonable for the person to stay in that location, and they bring in whoever they wanted. Now, you've got you've got quite a few different dynamics that are going on. I'm not sure that the city could actually come in and do something equitable for that particular community. Um, and there lies, you've got the economic issues, you've got the social issues that are associated with creating a food desert, and you begin to look at well, what makes the most sense, and you're inside of a pandemic. So you're already trying to not crowd any locations. You're trying to provide it, and again, these are essential. So in fact, we visited a place a few years ago in Brooklyn, and that whole corridor on Atlantic Avenue was changing. And the hardware store, remember, the hardware store owner, um, he was not a big Ace or Home Depot or what have you. He was just a mom and pop hardware store. Couldn't compete, And in fact, because the businesses around him were bringing in restaurants, he was forced to bring in restaurants, and and economically, it made more sense for him as the because he also owned the building, so he, succumbed, closed down his hardware store, and brought in a restaurant that was in a neighborhood that was gentrifying. So you have these issues going on all the time. Is it the responsibility of the community? Is it the responsibility of the business? Is it the responsibility of the landlord or the property owner? So you've got multiple interests that are competing, and unfortunately, the bottom line dollar helps to motivate some of those decision making.
Maybe the overruling that consideration should be the concern for the community. Um, Now, for 2 years, it seems this development company that owns the property has been trying to make changes, but the people in the area have fought back. Um, this has been going on for 2 years, this struggle. Now, I'm just wondering um, if the loss of the associated becomes a crisis so that we have a food desert, shouldn't we be asking the question that maybe a, a year and a half ago, someone on a higher level, like the city administration, should have realized there's only one supermarket here. What can we do to encourage other markets to come into the area? Shouldn't there be some planning like that?
Well, in fact, they actually had a program to help eliminate some of the food deserts, where they gave extra area square footage to be able to be applied for fresh fruits and vegetables. So that if you had a commercial location, you could actually expand what you would normally be allowed to do legally, um, for that building, if you were going to install some fresh fruits.
But if
Uh,
that building is at jeopardy, why couldn't we have some type of reach out for another chain, maybe 2 blocks away, that could have been established? If Associated has to leave, we still have another supermarket.
well, I completely agree with you. I think that that's part of the community planning. However, community planning is usually done inside of zoning. So unless you have the right zoning to come in, and maybe the zoning changed, or maybe this developer realized that they can get more money from a different kind of business in that particular location. When we look around uh, Queens, Jamaica, Queens, we see that all of the properties are being converted to hotels and apartments. We're talking about 5,000 units of hotels and apartments that are going to be available in the next 2 to 3 years. And so you look at the zoning, the zoning was changed to 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 heighten the density, and so with the density heightened, that means that you would now knock down uh, a supermarket to build a high rise with apartments. Now, to me, smart money would say, okay, well, if that's the case, you knock down the grocery store, but you then rebuild with that first floor being available for a grocery store, and then you have apartments above it, so that you've got like a mixed use. So there are different ways that developers look at it, and obviously they're looking to maximize their investment.
Well, again, we hear that word investment. Um, w- we have to find, I think, some way of adding the idea of service to the community, as well as the idea of investment.
Well, the whole conversation of community investment is one of those tricky things. Um, the politicians um, like to leverage it, but when it comes down to the bottom line, it really is up to the developer or the property owner in terms of how that gets to be executed. You've got some property owners that will bend over backwards that are committed to the community and would not make a decision that would take a critical supermarket out of that particular community because they um, love and honor that particular community and understand that that the intrinsical or the the working with the community is much more important than making a dollar over that particular community because the well-being of that community is at stake. Um, However, not all property owners are that receptive and somewhat interested. I know property owners that have an attachment because their family members own the store or participate in something, and so they brought that particular property because they're committed to the community. There are other people that live outside of that community that don't care about that community have property and would allow it to be blighted or so forth until they are able to turn it over or turn it around. So you've got so many different variables around um, you know, does the community have what it needs? How do you bring it to that particular community? What kinds of initiatives can you put in place to attract the kind of mix of businesses that you need for that community? And the community board does some of that. The elected officials do some of that, and your local property owners and the bids do that kind of work to try to get the right mix for that particular community. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
This almost reminds me of the movie, The Milagro Beanfield War. Um, in the Southwest, a bean farmer finds that his water is being diverted to help a golf course resort that's being built. He accidentally kicks over part of the irrigation system, diverting the water to his bean field, denying the water to the golf course,
Hmm.
which creates a real problem for the developer.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the local community likes the idea of having the extra farming that's going on. But it sets up two armed camps, all based on the use of water and the service to the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy answer, and we've got to work together. We've been talking about this a lot through COVID, and it's going to take people working together, looking at what's going to really make a difference moving forward, and it's um, nothing beats communication and working together, and that's what it's going to take so that both the golf course and the farmers get what they need, and both because both are important to the community.
Well, if you like what you've been listening to, get in touch with us at Facebook. That's Community and Social Change.
Thank you.